Board will now come to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Troop, Alderwoman Flowers, Alderman Bosley, Alderman Moore, Alderwoman Triplett, Ms. Spence, Alderwoman Young, Alderman Conway, Alderman Ortman, Alderman Vollmer, Alderman Villa, Alderman Arnowitz, Alderman Wessels, Alderwoman Howard, Alderwoman Florida, Alderwoman Behringer, Alderman Rhodey, Alderman Kennedy, Alderwoman Davis, Alderman Schmid, Alderman French, Alderman Boyd, Alderman Vaccaro, Alderman Ogilvie, Alderman Cone, Alderman Williamson, Alderman Carter, Alderwoman Cruzen, President Reed,
Here.
Alderwoman Flowers, Alderman Bosley, Alderman Moore, Alderman Conway, Alderman Wessels, Alderwoman Howard, Alderwoman Florida, Alderman Kennedy, Alderwoman Davis, Alderman Cone, 18 present.
Quorum being present, we will be led today in prayer by Reverend John Watson of Maple Temple Church of God. Reverend.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we first thank you for the privilege to petition you through prayer. We acknowledge with gratitude the progress our great city has made. We are mindful of those who suffer from want and anxiety, from lack of work, and pray we might find ways to encourage and help job development throughout our city. Guide our city officials' collective efforts so that their works yield good use of our city resources, responsive to your will. All this we ask in your holy name. Amen.
I want to also say a special thanks to the Reverend because he had planned to be here tomorrow and found out yesterday that our board meeting was on Thursday and changed the schedule. So thank you, Reverend, for coming out there. We will spin with our regular order of business, take up our courtesy resolution calendar, move for adoption of our courtesy resolution calendar, seconded by Alderman from the 12th. Alderman from the 6th, you'd like to approach the dais for the presentation of resolution number 250.
Good morning, Mr. President and members of the Board of Aldermen. It's my pleasure to be before you this morning and to present this resolution to a man who is notably worthy of this recognition from our esteemed body. I am pleased to present this resolution on behalf of the Board of Aldermen to Mr. Luther Frederick Coyle. Some of you all may be familiar with Mr. Coyle and may know him as I have known him as Coach Coyle. Mr. Coyle has been a transfixture in St. Louis sports for over 40 years. He has coached numerous men and women's basketball teams throughout the St. Louis metropolitan area. He was actually one of my first basketball coaches growing up. And so it's a pleasure to present him this resolution and also tell you a little bit more about his esteemed career and legacy as far as being a community servant in our town. Whereas Mr. Coyle attended Washington Elementary and graduated from Sumner High School in June 1967, he earned a Bachelor of Arts in Urban Affairs Community Services from St. Louis University and an MA master's degree in Management and Public Administration from Webster University. Whereas Mr. Coyle served in the United States Air Force, and he also made sergeant in less than 2 years. He received the Gallantry Cross, defended the Air Force in Thailand, and served in the Recon Military Police in Okinawa, Japan. He represented the Armed Force poster involving the Navy, the Army, the Marine, and Air Force, and was the only African American featured in that poster. Whereas Mr. Coyle coached girls and women's basketball for over 32 years and won numerous championships, he coached at the elementary, high school, and collegiate levels. Mr. Coyle won a state championship with Wellston High School in 1994 and made 5 trips to the state finals in 1992, 93, 94, 95, and 96. Some of you all may be familiar who followed women's basketball. LaShonda Albert, who is a standout high school player, he coached her. He's also coached many more successful women that were involved in basketball in our time. Mr. Coyle became a Mason at the age of 26 and received an award in 1979 as a realistic expert and an appreciation award for service to the community. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Aldermen in the City of St. Louis, that we pause in our deliberations to recognize the many contributions of Mr. Luther Frederick Coyle to the St. Louis community, and we further direct the Clerk of Board of Aldermen to supply a copy of this resolution across the minutes of these proceedings and to prepare a commemorative copy to the end that it may be presented to our honoree at a time and place deemed appropriate by the sponsor. So with that, I would like to present this resolution to Mr. Coyle and have him come forward with a few words.
Good morning. I'd like to thank Alderwoman Casey Starr Triplett for this wonderful recognition, and the Honorable President Reed for his leadership and his steadfastness in setting the bar high, and to you, the Aldermen of the City of St. Louis, for all that you do for its citizens. I wanted to tell you a little story about my mother, but I don't think I have much time. But I just want to talk about the policy of discipline. For if we had that in our public schools today, I think we'd have more graduates coming out of high school. But my mother always taught us discipline. She was from Longview, Texas, domestic worker, social worker, civil rights activist, and she always kept us in line. But one day I violated the rules. I was 11 years old. I won't tell you what I did because it's too embarrassing. But I went out the back door like O.J. Simpson. So she sent my oldest brother, who was a pretty convincing man, and he came up to me. I was out there freezing because it was in the fall time. I didn't have a jacket on. And he said, "Come on back, man. Everything is copacetic." For you old schools, that means everything is fine. So I said, okay. So as we go up the steps to the front door, I noticed I was in front of my brother. So since I was near the door, I knocked on the door, and he had assured me everything was copacetic. But just then, I saw the curtains of the front door open up like an opening performance on a stage. And the shoes I had on were bigger than what they were supposed to be. So she grabbed me by the collar, pulled me in. I came out of those shoes. She whipped me from the living room to the kitchen. And she'd always taught me the policy was, whenever you're in trouble, call on the Lord for help. Well, as she whipping me, I hit the kitchen door and I fell down. I raised my hands up and I said, "Lord, help me." She said, "Darn it, the Lord don't hear you." That's the policy of discipline. Thank you very much for this presentation, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Coach, don't go anywhere yet. Coach, you know, I am really honored to have an opportunity to stand on this dais and share this moment with you. This resolution that Alderwoman has given you is literally the highest honor that this board has to give. And what it does is that it cements in time some of your many contributions to the city and the lives that you've changed. And I can tell you, as one person in the city, I appreciate, you know, not just what you've done on the court, but the lives you've changed and the lives that they will change. And, you know, that lesson that your mother taught you, they got that same lesson, but they didn't have to take the whipping. You did. So we can't thank you enough for what you've done and the lives that you've changed and, you know, everything that you've done for the city of St. Louis and many people across this nation. Thanks again, Coach.
Thank you so much. I have one of my players here.
Oh, you have one of the players?
Yeah, want to step up? Yeah. Tell
This is
me.
one of the players.
Wow, Luther Coyle. He was real disciplined. Yes, I cried after every game. And practice was super hard. Suicides, so many suicides. But he did. He kept us in line. We traveled. We won plenty of championships. We did a lot. It was really awesome, and I appreciate every moment of it. All the girls that played with me at the time, we still hang out, we still talk. So it was a really great experience, and we love Luther. So thank you.
You want to line up? We're going to take pictures over here, Coach.
Downstairs?
Yeah, we can get Any further comments? Any further comments? All right, it's been moved and seconded. We adopt our courtesy resolution. Count all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Turn our regular order of business. Introduction of honored guests. Any introduction of honored guests? Alderman from the 12th.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I have two guests today I'd like to introduce. First one is Brandon Flynn, who is the business manager for Local 42. Brandon, if you stand up. Brandon's been a friend of the family for years, and just want to introduce him and bring him down and see what's going on in city politics. My other guest is Tim Ogle. Tim's special assistant to Congressman Carnahan. I'd like to introduce him today as well.
Thanks, Brian. Alderman from the 1st.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have two honored guests. We have former Alderwoman Irene J. Smith from the First Ward, and we have former committee woman, state representative of the First Ward, Yafet Aldermen.
Alderman from 26. Your pants.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I think the Alderman in the First Ward kind of stole my thunder on my honor guest. But anyway, I'd like to announce that Yafet Aldermen, former state representative and a resident of 26th Ward. That's my honor guest. Thank you.
All right. Alderman from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the board, I'd like to have as my special guest the AT&T family and the Amber UE family. Thank you.
Alderman from the 9th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the board, I'd like to have for my honored guest today, Ronnie Auer, former state rep and committeeman of the 9th Ward.
Welcome, Ron. Alderman from the 16th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the board, I would like to have as my special guest today, Anthony Lancia with AGC, David Holmes with Plumbers and Pipe Fitters, and Steve Spreck with Communications Workers.
Alderman from the 22nd.
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the board. I'd like to have as my honored guest this morning, Ms. Joanne Williams with the Carpenters District Council.
Welcome, Joanne. Any further introductions? Any further introductions? I don't see the Alderman from the 10th, so I think we're, Alderman from the 10th, do you have anything to wrap us up?
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. Today is November 10th, National Forget-Me-Not Day, but my special guest apparently forgot me. He didn't show up. Thank you.
Alderman from 13, you recognize on approval of the minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I move to approve the minutes of the October 28th meeting.
Moved by the Alderman from 13th, seconded by the Alderman from 12th. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, motion carries. Report of city officials.
Report of city officials can be found in sections A, B, and C of the agenda and have been placed in all aldermen's mailboxes.
We dispense with line item 7. Would anyone like to take any bills off of any of our informal calendars? Would anyone like to take any bills off of any of our informal calendars? Alderman from the 17th, you recognize?
Yes, Mr. President. I'd like to move Board Bill number 190 off the informal calendar.
Please proceed, Alderman. Please make your motion.
I move that we perfect Board Bill 190.
Moved by the Alderman from the 17th, seconded by the Alderman from the 20th. Alderman, please proceed.
Mr. President, members of the board, this is a great day for the citizens of St. Louis. It's, in a little bit I'll be talking about milestones, but today is more than a milestone, it's a capstone. It's the crowning effort of over a quarter of a decade's worth of work. In 1986, a group of concerned citizens who were worried about the condition of Forest Park met in one of their front living rooms. And from that, there was an outgrowth, an effort to go ahead and start fixing Forest Park, and they formed something called Forest Park Forever. And as they did that, they began attracting attention and support. And we went ahead and began, or they went ahead and began moving forward, and for the last 25 years, they have been slowly putting in place sources of money, donations, public support for the effort to fix Forest Park and the grandeur that a park of that nature deserves. I've been an alderman for 23 years now. We put up with all the phone calls, all the complaints, so that sometime down here we can live for days like today. This is one of those historic days where we'll be able to go back and talk to your children and your grandchildren about the day that you sat on the board of the aldermen and voted to make sure that Forest Park would be forever. In my 23 years down here, I can count on the fingers the number of significant days that I've been down here and have played such an important role. And it's just a very, very exciting time and a unique opportunity to do this. we're going to go ahead and try to explain this. It's a fairly complicated bill. We're going to be showing a bunch of numbers and everything. But the one thing that all of you should remember about this bill, the one thing that this is all about, all the gyrations, all the legislation, all the moving of the numbers, is we're trying to go ahead and collect $130 million from somebody who wants to give that to the citizens of St. Louis to take care of Forest Park. I just noticed that the comptroller walked in, and I understand you're wanting to speak today. And the numbers that I have are fairly complex, and before I walk through all this, I was wondering if the comptroller would yield for questions. Would you yield for questions, Madam Comptroller, if you're going to speak? You know, speak against the bill. I was going to ask you if go ahead and yield for questions.
Alderman, you need to direct that toward me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
May I ask the comptroller to yield for questions?
Oh, Madam Comptroller, will you yield for questioning to the Alderman from the 17th?
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes.
Alderman from the 17th, please proceed.
Madam Comptroller, I understand. We haven't talked about this, but I understand that you had some issues with the bill. And what I was hoping to do is kind of get those issues down on a sheet of paper and perhaps address some of those as I go through my presentation, because we haven't had a chance to talk. And actually, before we get into your specific issues, I wanted to make sure, as we're down here on the floor getting ready to perfect this, I was just kind of curious. We had the opportunity in front of committee to go ahead and discuss this, and you nor any member of your staff was at our committee hearing, and I was just wondering, is this something new that's come up in the last week or so, or why wasn't it that this wasn't brought up over at our committee so we could have kind of discussed it at that point?
The question you asked is about why you are unaware of our opposition. Is that the correct question?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know why you would be unaware of our opposition. We've been opposed to this particular bond issue for months, since March of this year. Our office, I've been represented by members of my office, Ivy Pinkston and others, and made it very clear that the comptroller does not support a non-essential bond issue of this type.
So your answer is is that the answer? Is that the reason why you didn't show up at our committee hearing?
As I complete my answer, Alderman, I am very, very clear that the comptroller does not support, at this time, in this downturn of the economy which we're in, we suffer loss of revenues in many areas. Many of our sales tax categories are down. And to promote a bond issue for non-essential needs at this time is certainly something that I have said I do not support since March of this year, Alderman, when I heard about it.
I'll be glad to ask you why you're not supporting. I was mostly wondering why you didn't show up at the committee hearing so that we could kind of understand this last week. Because you have to understand, I only found out about this 2 months ago, so I didn't even know this was going on. I introduced this bill at the request of the president, thinking that this was like American Pie, and I still believe that. And I find out, I didn't have, you certainly didn't call me. Matter of fact, I talked to nobody in the comptroller's office, and we had a committee hearing that is well publicized, that is a place where we take public comment for somebody who has a problem with anything, and nobody from the comptroller's office showed up. I mean, if we would have known, if I would have known then, we might have been able to deal something with it, but we're now on the floor of the board and we're ready to perfect this today, and you show up, and I just was kind of wondering why you didn't show up last week or 2 weeks ago.
Well, that's a good question in terms of why I didn't show up, but it's also good to be noted that my opposition was there prior to the committee meeting. As I stated earlier, I've been opposed since March of this year, and I know that staff in many departments work towards some type of conclusion, which you obviously have today. We opposed it in March, and we opposed it, stood in position at the time of the committee meeting. Our office stood in opposition of any type of bond issue. We were opposed. And at that point in time where we possibly could have been invited, the members of my staff are unaware that they were invited to speak. Of course, those meetings are publicized publicly, and then I guess we could have assumed that we were invited to speak, but instead we were working on some budgetary matters for the city at the time.
Okay, so how many people work in the comptroller's office? Is there?
We have 90+ employees in the comptroller's office. Okay,
so you had 90+ employees working in the comptroller's office. The Board of Aldermen, as part of the executive branch, we are the legislative branch, and we have a public hearing to discuss a board bill, and I'm not, as a primary sponsor, I'm just wondering why you didn't pick up the phone call and say, hey, Joe, I got a problem with this. I supported you last election. I checked with the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, who is, you know, our fiscal representative, and she was unaware of your opposition, so evidently no one from your office had contacted her as well. Matter of fact, has anybody, because I still haven't talked to anybody in your office. I really pointed question, simple.
Sure, and I will give you
which alderman on the floor of the Board of Aldermen have you talked to discuss your opposition with this? Have you talked to, did you talk to the mayor about it?
Are you done with your question?
Okay, well, fine. I'll wait for your answer.
I spoke directly to the president of the Board of Aldermen regarding this issue, and at the time he knew at the time and knows now that I am opposed. I also have spoken with his deputy, and he does also know that I oppose it as well.
Okay. Did you speak to any of the other aldermen?
Tom Shepard. I spoke with Tom Shepard.
He's not one of the. Did you speak with any of the other aldermen?
My office has, yes.
You personally?
My office.
Have you
I have not personally spoken to you, and you're correct. You did not call me.
Did you speak on it?
And
did you speak to any of the other aldermen?
So you're correct that, and I did not call any other aldermen regarding this. I didn't call them, but I have spoken to several other aldermen.
Well, who are they? Do you mind sharing that with us?
Well, yes, I did speak to several aldermen regarding the bill and the opposition that I have. It's a meeting that was put together, but I think the point is about...
What meeting was that, Madam
Alderman for the 17th, Alderman from the 1st.
Yes, point of order, Mr. President. I would request that the Alderman from the 17th speak on the issue of the bonds, and not about the comptroller. I think that this is not a personal...
I respect that.
This is not a personal issue, and it is a very serious issue in that in this bond issue, should the city default, then the Forest Park would come under the control of Forest Park forever, and the city would lose the park. So I think this is important. I think you need to listen to the comptroller, and I think you need to answer her questions and deal with the issue that on the table, and that's the bonds.
Alderman from the 17th, stick to the question of the bonds. I know you were about to review that. Maybe it's a good time to review what.
Thank you. Just as summary so far, we know that the comptroller failed to attend the committee meeting. She hasn't talked to, I believe, any of the white aldermen, although I believe she's met with a number of the black aldermen. And I personally find that offensive, but now that we've gotten that dealt with, let's go ahead and deal with the issue at hand. And the issue at hand is what is your objection to this particular bond issue? And
quite simply, this bond issue is one that is for non-essential items for the city of St. Louis. Citizens have gone to the polls and voted for tax dollars that support the parks. The Board of Aldermen and the administration of the city has negotiated in good faith with BJC for funds for supporting of the park, and now we have a minimum of $7 million available annually to spend for park maintenance, upkeep, and capital needs. And what we are being asked to do with this bond issue, Alderman, is to take those dollars and tie them up into a bond issue and making less money available for maintenance in our current budget, therefore requiring that the city of St. Louis would look elsewhere for additional dollars atop of the $7+ million that has already been made available. So I think that because we have asked citizens to pay for their trash, we've told citizens that our employees might have to take furloughs in the coming budget year. They were going to take furloughs in the current budget year, except for the Cardinals winning the World Series. Now, as the comptroller of the city, it is my job to protect the credit of the city and to speak on behalf of whether or not a bond issue, and quite frankly, Alderman, to be asked from any of the departments or bodies that are contemplating a bond issue prior to bringing it to the floor of any meeting for the Board of Aldermen. I was not asked. It was not done properly, whether a committee meeting or not. And I am not standing here as feeling offended as you are, but I am standing here to let the citizens know that this bond issue is, in my opinion, one that is not of essential needs of city services to the citizens of the city of St. Louis, and it also has an area in its language that would deed over the park, Forest Park, which is the jewel of the city of St. Louis, to Forest Park forever, wherein the city would fail or default on payments to this bond issue for non-essential needs for the parks. This is a political bond issue, and as I have been told by certain department members, that I have been told that because the city of St. Louis has used funds legally and rightly to pay a $600,000 electric bill for Forest Park, that certain members in the private sector are appalled that tax dollars kept the lights on in Forest Park. I think that the board who voted for the budget and the administration that supported us did the right thing, keeping the lights on in Forest Park. And to have outsiders who are outside of city government say that we now should tie up the funds in a bond to pay for a bond issue is not fair to the citizens of the city of St. Louis. It is also not fair to put in language in a bill that would turn over the jewel of the city, Forest Park. So I oppose this bill very strongly. I've spoken with park personnel. I've spoken with others who have supported the bond issue, and quite frankly, they do not stand now in strong support of the bill as you seem to, Alderman. They are willing to work on a different agreement that is aside from a bond issue for this non-essential capital that you're proposing, and I would suggest that you would work with those staff, with the city administration and others to craft a more realistic pay-as-you-go program for park maintenance and capital needs. A pay-as-you-go program is more appropriate than tying up tax dollars for 30 years, and in addition to tying up the tax dollars, you would request more dollars that are going for other essential needs of the city to then be put in the park budget, because the park budget dollars would go for non-essential needs. In a downturn of economy that we are in now, I cannot support it. Our monies are not flowing freely. Our revenues are down. People are going to be asked to pay for their trash as they have been for the last several months. That is not going away. Also, water fees are possibly to increase, along with other city service fees throughout the city of St. Louis. And those city service fees, some of those would go to pay for the park maintenance, because in the same board bill, park maintenance fees being sucked up by the bond that you're proposing would not be available to pay for park maintenance anymore. So I oppose it. I oppose it strongly. I think, again, Alderman, you have the opportunity to let the citizens know that you will reconsider this bill in its current state, and that you will go back to the park staff and discuss a pay-as-you-go measure and program that would be more responsible with tax dollars. This is irresponsible if it's voted on today and it goes forward. It would be very irresponsible for this board to vote for and pass a bill for non-essential needs at this time. In a couple of months, we'll be looking at the budget for the city of St. Louis. Pension costs are high. Pay negotiations are at hand for our citizens. Again, we have $7 million plus per year to pay for park maintenance and other needs. With this bill, those dollars would be sucked into a bond issue, and those monies would go away. Thank you.
If I could try to summarize, because I want to make sure that I address your points.
Sure.
First issue is in tough economic times, we're taking money. We're kind of two parts to this. One is we're buying non-essential items. So that's kind of part one of it. And not only are we buying them, but we're committing funds in a tough economic time that will preclude us from going ahead and taking that money and spending it somewhere else. Along those lines, the issue of if we default, we're pledging the park as collateral in the event that we default, and so that was the third issue. And those are your three primary issues. Was there anything else before I start on my
I didn't hear you mention the budget of the city. I didn't hear you mention that employees would be asked in the next year's budget to take furloughs, Alderman. I did not hear you mention the reduction in several taxes that make up the revenue for the city. I did not hear you mention the replacement of those tax dollars that are now being asked to support this bond issue, and how those needs would be paid for, how the city maintenance would be paid for. I didn't hear you mention those, and I oppose all of those items as well.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Comptroller. What I'd like to do now is begin talking about how this works and hopefully address some of these issues as we go along. If you could, I passed out some flyers, some sheets on the paper, a little packet, and they should mirror these over here. I know that this is incredibly small and difficult to read, so bear with me. My hope is that in about 5 minutes here, we can go ahead and give you all a primer on what has transpired over the last 25 years as we kind of recapture or relive some of those milestones that I was talking about in the process of making Forest Park forever. Back in we talked about how a group of citizens in 1986 formed a group called Forest Park Forever in their living room and started raising money. And they did that and, you know, kind of pieced together nickels and dimes and quarters. They had kids raising pennies at their school, and they started going ahead and doing a few things for the park. About that time, we had a major election, and the Post-Dispatch made the condition of Forest Park a front page issue. And our former mayor, Mayor Bosley, I personally think perhaps the second greatest legacy that he has in his term of being mayor, the first one being that he was the city's first African-American mayor. The second legacy, though, is what he did for Forest Park. He had a summit. They brought everyone together, and they passed a half-cent sales tax. And in 1995, part of that half-cent sales tax went to the park. And if you're looking at the sheet, you can see we've highlighted it in yellow because we wanted to highlight the milestones. And between 1995 and 1997, a couple things happened. The first one was that they began devoting $1.8 million a year to Forest Park as a result of that bond issue. And that is dedicated. The citizens of St. Louis said, we want to spend $1.8 million a year to fix up Forest Park, and they took a vote on it, and they supported that. Mayor Bosley, through his efforts of coordinating all the folks who were involved in this planning effort for Forest Park, came up and determined that in order for the park to be in truly pristine condition, a park worthy of a great city like ours, we needed to go ahead and spend $139 million on the park. And that was where we came up with the $139 million. And in 1997, excuse me, under the leadership of Mayor Bosley, this Board of Aldermen, our predecessor session down here, went ahead and they supported a bond issue that would go ahead and pledge $1.4 million to borrow $20 million to make improvements on the park. And this is under the administration of former Mayor Bosley. I was down at the board here at the time, and it was hotly contested at that time. The Board of Aldermen leased the park to an entity. That entity went out, pledged it as collateral, and borrowed $20 million. So the issue that the comptroller raises about pledging the park as collateral for a loan, that was a decision that was made in 1997, and we're going to renew that decision today if we go ahead and support this. But that was a decision that Mayor Bosley and this Board of Aldermen agreed to go ahead and pledge the park as collateral. So that issue that she raises, that was decided by this board 15 years ago. So that's issue number one. So that was the first milestone. We were able to collect $20 million. And since then, as a result of part of those, well, let me kind of go through here. In the year 2000 was our next milestone. In 2000, under the leadership of Peter Sartino and the 2004 effort, there was a regional-wide effort to go ahead and improve the parks of our region. And they got taxes put on the ballot, St. Louis City, the county, and some of the other surrounding counties. And we were able, as a result of that, to include, for Forest Park, $400,000 a year from that bond issue. And so now all of a sudden we had two streams of money to support the improvements of the park. Over the next few years, improvements continue to be made, some of those paid for by the city, and some of them paid for by Forest Park Forever. The next milestone in the park occurred in the year 2007. And in 2007, we had an opportunity to lease part of Forest Park to BJC. And that lease called upon BJC to go ahead and pay the city $2 million a year. And we, the city, agreed to do that, to that lease, and that $2 million then we were able to go in Forest Park Forever, this small group of citizens, everybody complains about lack of leadership in St. Louis, this small group of citizens had grown their organization enough that they're raising enough money in support of our park to go out and raise annually, consistently, over $1.8 million a year, and they pledged to go ahead and put that $1.8 million against the $2 million if we went ahead and did that lease with BJC. So all of a sudden, we're getting $3.8 million plus the 1.8 plus another 400,000, all in a period of a few years as people began working to go ahead and try to fix Forest Park in this quarter-of-a-decade-long effort. So we're sitting here, we're now going ahead, and we have that in place. And when that $2 million got put into Forest Park, one of the agreements and understanding that we had in order to get that done was that we were going to go ahead and free up $1.2 million that was being spent in Forest Park, and that was going to go ahead and be spent in the neighborhood parks because the aldermen down here felt that Forest Park was getting too much attention, and we needed to spend some of that money in the neighborhood parks. So that was the milestone in 2007, and now we're in 2012. And we have this unique opportunity today to go ahead and really make some dramatic changes. Where we stand in this $130 million, $9 million goal is the city, through their bond issues and so forth, has put in $20 million of a bond issue. We put in an additional $23 million, and our friends from Forest Park Forever contributed another $43 million, not of taxpayers' money, but from other people's money. People that wanted to go ahead and take their own money and support our effort to renew the park. So that's where we are today, and what we would like to do with this board bill is Forest Park Forever is in a unique opportunity in that they've been talking to a lot of their donors, some of them very wealthy people, and it was one thing to go ahead and fix the park, but their goal wasn't just to fix the park. Their goal is to fix the park forever and make sure that it stays in that great condition. So they've been working very feverishly on how not just to go ahead and fix it, but how to endow it so that there will be a pool of money there that, regardless of the city's financial condition, will be available to take care of Forest Park. Now, this is how they propose to do it. They propose to go and raise $130 million from private donors. They would like to make sure that if they go ahead and spend all this money fixing up the park, that the city doesn't go ahead and pull the support that we currently have for the park out of it and spend it somewhere else, which is what we have done over the years. Not only out of Forest Park's budget, but out of the neighborhood parks' budgets. Every time something gets a little tight, we run out and pull money out of the park. So they wanted to go ahead and they say, if we fix up the park for you, at some point in the future, we'll take over a huge cost of operating it, but we want to know that until we get there, that the city is not going to go ahead and undermine what we're doing for the park and destroy our efforts, because why are we going to go out and ask people to raise money to fix the park up if you're just going to neglect it? So they're asking for us to make a commitment that we sustain our current level of funding. And so what would happen is they are asking us to pledge $1.8 million, they're asking us to pledge earned revenue, additionally pledge $1.3 million of earned revenue. That earned revenue that you see is money that we are currently collecting by renting out things in the park. And that's where other departments in the city have been raiding over the last couple of years. We get a budget, they take $600,000 out of that, and we don't have that money for the park. So the folks who are wanting to give us money for the park say, we'll give you this money, but stop raiding that account. We want to make sure that that stays in the park. And then they said we got this other $400,000 that we have from the Metro tax, and we'd like to make sure that stays in the park. And we'd like to make sure that the money that the other money that the citizens voted for to stay in the park, the 1.8 million, what was left of that, which was 400,000, we'd like to make sure that all that money that the citizens voted to stay in the park will stay in the park. So then that gives us $2 million. We'll go out and borrow $30 million to keep in the park, and that $2 million, who's going to buy those bonds? Forest Park Forever is going to buy the bonds, and when we pay them the $2 million, they're going to give it right back to us to spend in the park. So they are going to go ahead and, in essence, loan us $30 million for free and spend the $2 million in the park. All they want to do is make sure that it gets spent in the park and that it doesn't get taken and spent somewhere else in city government. That is what this is all about. I said this bill is complicated. Well, it is. That is why I'm for this. I'm for one reason down here, and my goal is to figure out how to get private donors to contribute $130 million for the city. That's all I want to do. And I'm willing to go ahead and jump through quite a few hoops to get that done. Now, this is where it gets a little complicated. They talk about making sausage in legislation. Well, we're going to see some sausage being made today because we need 15 votes to get this through the Board of Aldermen. And part of that is if Forest Park's getting a lot, well, maybe what do we need to do for some of the local parks? So we step over here, and this is the second of the two bond issues that are being discussed today. The one for Forest Park is $30 million. This is a slam dunk, no-brainer. We get $130 million as long as we leave all the money that's originally intended to the park stay in the park. This one over here is a little different. This is something that the aldermen want down here. And what it is beginning back in 1985 when we did that one bond issue, you know, the sales tax that former Mayor Bosley led our effort on, 1.1 million of that was dedicated to neighborhood parks or regional parks. Then what happened in 2000, we said that when BJC did their deal over here, the alderman down here, representing all the neighborhood parks out there, said now that Forest Park's taken care of, and we freed up some money in the Forest Park budget, why shouldn't the rest of the city parks benefit from that freedom? So what they did was we moved $1.2 million out of the Forest Park budget, and we moved it over to the local parks, and that's the park fund that we currently divide up 28 ways. Or not, we don't divide it up 28 ways, but we do that every year. We split that money. So now, what we're going to do is, I'm sorry, the 1.2 million was the Metro Parks tax, the first 1.2 million. The second one was in 2007 as a result of the BJC lease. So with that money, the Parks Department, with the encouragement of the aldermen, wanted to have 75% of that money devoted to a $34 million bond issue that would let them speed up the improvements that are available in the parks. And they will then go ahead, instead of going ahead and doing dribs and drabs a little bit at a time over the next 30 years, they'll be able to go ahead and put a really big dent into the outstanding needs of those parks. You can see there's a $100 million need. This is only a small step to addressing those, but it would give them a way of accelerating those needs. Now, in the future, what's going forward as we go forward, in 2022, about 10 years from now, that first bond issue is going to get paid off, and that'll free up $1.4 million a year. A few years after that, at some point in the future, Forest Park Forever will have completed their $130 million fundraising, the $30 million they will have given us, and they'll have $100 million that will be endowed, that will be there to endow the park, and that will yield $4 million a year that they will go ahead and leave in the park. And that gets us to the third exhibit, which is basically showing us where we are now for fixing the park and where we are later. And so what this is designed to show you is, yes, we're going to borrow some money today, but it's actually free money. It's money that's going to come back to us. It's $130 million. We're borrowing 64, and we're going to end up getting over 130 in exchange for that. And while we are making some commitments and limiting our flexibility somewhat in the money that's available to spend in the city, we have some pretty significant mandates historically from our bosses, the citizens of St. Louis, that said they want that money spent in the parks. And we're at this kind of very unique opportunity where if we do this today, we're going to be able at some point in the future to offload a huge portion of the cost of running Forest Park, and those proceeds will then forever be available to be used in other parts of city government. So that is the outline of what the bill or the bond issues that we're proposing today will substantially do. And that's why I said this isn't a milestone, this is the capstone. If Forest Park Forever is successful in raising their $130 million, this project will be complete. And the citizens of St. Louis will know that irrespective of who's down here in city government, Forest Park will be there forever. Now, the comptroller talked about the risk of losing Forest Park if we default in the bonds. Well, yeah, but we already have that in place. Every time you go out and borrow money, if you don't pay the people back, there's some consequences. I would like not to have to go ahead and lose my house if I choose not to pay my mortgage payment, but my mortgage company won't be real happy about that. And by going ahead and pledging your house as collateral, you can borrow money less expensively. I don't think it's in anybody's intent to come down and spend money, not pay that money, and I can't imagine the time that the city would ever not pay the bonds back in Forest Park. We talked about committing funds. Yes, I agree with the comptroller. We are absolutely losing a little bit of flexibility, but we come down here, and here's the amazing thing about this, folks. Most of us come down here because we're interested in something out in our neighborhood. We're a neighborhood activist. We have an issue. Something brings us to decide that you want to get in city government. You get down here, and basically when we come down here, this is all about cutting up pies. And where does the money go? And we have people come down here every year asking us for money. They might be employee unions. They might be people wanting to do business with the city. They might be environmental groups, they might be wonderful groups for wanting things for homelessness, groups that want bicycle paths, people who want their sidewalks fixed in front of their homework, and in front of their houses. Everybody comes down here asking us for money. Here is a chance where somebody comes down here with money and says, I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you $130 million, and all I want in exchange is if I endow your park, you take care of it. That's what's before us today. And the only reason I threw this second part in is that I need 15 of your votes. And if the comptroller wants to go ahead and take that second part back, tell me how to do it with 15 votes and we'll do it. We asked this question in front of committee and nobody wanted to do it. I'll go ahead. I have, of all the aldermen down here, I have perhaps the least to lose if we do that. This piece of legislation, Forest Park's not in my ward. I have 2 small parks, and I get $100,000 out of a $34 million bond issue spent in my park, my ward. I have absolutely nothing to lose by taking that out. But if you want to take that out, we need 15 votes to do it, and we need those 15 votes in order to get the $130 million gift to the city. Somebody tell me how to do it and get it out here. I'm all for it. But that's what this is about. We come down here, we have to cut up the pie. Most people are asking for money. This is somebody who's giving us money, and all they're asking us for is to endow the park, to go ahead and maintain the existing funding that we have out there. It's a relatively modest request to make of us. Now, the other thing is why would we do this for parks and not for some of the other departments if we're going to commit this money? Well, folks, when I die, I hope my children love me. But I don't think they ought to show that love for me by buying a dumpster and naming it me. Forest Park is one of those things that attracts donations. There are very few things in the city, there are very few things, period, that people want to give money to that the government should be doing for them. They're not going to want to go ahead and give, who's going to come up and endow us to go ahead and make sure that we replace dumpsters every couple of years? Who's going to endow us so that the police department's going to be taken care of? Who's going to go ahead and endow us so that the alleys get, patched? Who's going to endow us for any of those things? We have an opportunity here by using those things, those memories of Forest Park, that special place in our city that tugs at the heartstrings of every one of our citizens, to go out and raise $130 million, and all they're wanting from us is that we can go ahead and figure out a way to commit to keep our current funding level at its current level until the park gets done, and then we'll be able to take that money and do something else with it. So that's what we're trying to do here. I'm sure there'll be some questions and some other comments, and I'll be available to answer them if anyone has.
Alderman from 19th, I think you were up first.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is on this bill as a sponsor, so I just want to make a couple of comments. I don't need any, rebuttals or anything else to me. I'm just going to give my position for today. This was my position last week, too, when I realized that we did not have the complete understanding from the comptroller's office. Now, let me give kudos to those who need them. I'm not trying to take anything from anybody for what they have done on behalf of the city. So I'll start at the top. Former Mayor Bosley, he had the insight to gather this group of people who had interest in Forest Park, and therefore we have Forest Park forever. Let me say that I have a proud thank you to those who have been members of their board, who have made generous donations on behalf of the beautiful renovations at Forest Park, and it is leaving us as a city with a jewel for anyone and everyone. I also want to say that I have to give respect to our comptroller, because at the end of the day, if we don't have that understanding from her office and know that it is not the right time, or it is the right time, and it is the right method for us to use, then of course we're going to be in trouble. But I gave my pledge to support this because yes, it is a good idea if we do it right and if we do it at the right time. We do need additional money for our parks. We do need to see the opportunity that we have with Forest Park Forever to continue, even though they will benefit most from this. They probably should, because they've donated a lot of money. So that's okay for me. And when Gary Best came to me, and I respect him and his job that he's done on behalf of the city, I told him, you and your committee go back and you talk to the comptroller's office. Because if you don't come back with an understanding from her office, then I can't vote for it, because that's just common sense. So what I want to just say is that we have time, we can take time, we can take this back to committee, we can work with the comptroller's office, and I'm going to tell you, if nothing else, if the news didn't scare you this morning, the city in Alabama that filed bankruptcy, if that didn't scare you, if the stock market didn't scare you in the drops, this is not the right time for this to happen. We need to know that we are in the right position with all of our funds and all of our bonding issues with the city of St. Louis before we make this move. So that's the only thing that I wanted to say. Yes, it's a great idea, but I must have the oversight and the understanding with the comptroller's office. And if it was me, if it was my bill, I would send it back to committee, and let's work on it and make it real.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Alderman from 20th.
Mr. President, members of the board, I am pleased to hear finally that the Alderman of the 17th is recognizing that this is a complicated bill. When the general message is very simple, but it's complicated because there's a whole lot of different interests. And I remember when Gary Best said that it wasn't complicated, but it is. And there's a lot of passion and there's a lot of thought around this, and there can be a lot of different opinions about this. None of the opinions are wrong. But at the end of the day, we end up having to make a decision here that's in the best interest for our constituents as well as for the whole city. As I reflect back, sometimes I say this to folks, that as a city, we have to make sure that our best days are ahead of us. But I do want to reflect the fact that many talk about the 1904 World's Fair. And the 1904 World's Fair, of course, was held in Forest Park. And there were institutions that grew up around that, and we have the museums, and we have Washington University and all of that. Certainly we can say that parks are non-essential, and I recognize that there are a whole lot of things such as obviously police protection and fire protection and all of those that are essential. But in terms of our quality of life, and St. Louis County is recognizing this today as they talk about closing parks and the opportunities that they provide for our health and well-being. We're talking about all of the health issues in our nation and within our city. Parks are incredibly important. And I know we all believe that and understand that down here, but if you ever want to see examples of that, just spend a day in Forest Park and see all of the great things in terms of the exercising and the recreation that goes there. Most of it free, and obviously nothing is free. We all pay for it. And we can say that we're going to pay as we go, which is a great thing to do, and this nation is recognizing that. But when others step up with non-taxpayer money, with private money, the dollars that we're all talking about that we want to gain in terms of partnership between government and non-governmental entities, such as Forest Park Forever, I think that the Alderman from the 17th is right on when he says that we should do, obviously in a way that's fiscally responsible, as the Alderwoman from the 19th said, we should do whatever it takes to make sure that the pay that we do for these opportunities is not all at the expense of our constituents, but it is at the expense of all within this region who appreciate and enjoy everything that Forest Park has for us. I know that through some of this passionate debate, things are said on this floor that we all regret. And the bell cannot be unrung. I think some of that was done today, and it always is. But we need to make sure that we're looking at the bill itself, that we're looking at the importance of that and the importance that this has for our future, because if our better and best days are ahead, we do need to preserve these opportunities and make sure that we spread the burden of paying for them across this region and not just on ourselves. I think this bill does that. There can certainly be differences of opinion, little tinkering and so forth. I think it is wise, and we'll be talking about that hopefully in the next bill. It is wise to also make sure that all of our communities, constituents who cannot necessarily make it to Forest Park every day, gain the benefits of that as well. We've talked about, and I don't need to reiterate that, there are people with wisdom who have sat together despite our many differences that come out in some of our language on this floor of the Board of Aldermen, wisdom of people who have sat down and had that long-term view. We are being asked today to put aside some of that baggage of our differences and to look at this and to say, is this in the best interest at the end of the day of our constituents? I believe that it is. At the committee hearing, even though the comptroller was not there, the issue of the comptroller who does, and I respect that, look at our fiscal integrity as a city. Some questions were raised. We asked for the memo that she had asked to be done on this matter, and I had questions after I read that memo, one of which, of course, was this defeasance and the chance that the park might go to other hands. All of those questions were answered. Most of those questions have been answered by the Alderman from the 17th, and I'm sure that he's willing to answer any more of those. But again, I am on this bill because I believe that we need to make sure that we have those partnerships with non-governmental entities who are willing to help us pay for what we all enjoy and going forward so that the city's best days are ahead.
All right, any further discussion? Any further discussion? He's not asking. Are you asking to be recognized, Alderman? All right. Alderman from 13th.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. Would the sponsor yield?
Alderman from the 17th, will you yield for questioning to the Alderman from the 13th?
Yes.
Alderman from 13th, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Was the comptroller invited to that Parks Committee meeting?
Not per se. It was
What about the budget director?
As I say, you know, the agenda is published and available to everybody. The budget director, I believe, works for E&A, and so I suspect that anybody on E&A can ask him to show up.
Where did these numbers come from?
Those numbers, we were working with Dan Skillman, and Gary Best provided those numbers.
Okay. And has the budget director and comptroller's office vetted these?
I'm sorry?
Has the comptroller's office or the budget division vetted the numbers?
Those numbers, I presume that Dan Skillman and Gary Best from the Parks Department got those from the budget division, but I do not know.
The reason I ask is I've met with the budget director. He doesn't feel the numbers
are reflective.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I don't have any other questions. I know everybody, all of us have a different style insofar as legislation is concerned. But if I were sponsoring a bill like this that had a financial impact on the city, I would definitely talk to the budget director. I would definitely talk to the comptroller and seeking their input, advice, counsel, and support. The sponsor started off by saying something. This is an opportunity to tell our children and our grandchildren what an important thing that we did today. If I voted for this bill, I would be embarrassed to tell my children and grandchildren about it. I would not, and I would hope that no one else in my family or friends would remember it and tell my children or grandchildren about it, because this is going to have a negative impact on the ability to make capital improvements in the Cronulla Park, which is our primary ward, and 13th ward, the 11th ward, 12th ward, and southeastern part of the city. Cronulla Park will have about $3 million in this bond issue. If we were, according to the budget director's figures, if we were going to receive our normal sales tax revenue, and assuming a 1% increase in the sales tax annually, we would receive just under $10 million over the 30-year period. Net present value, figured at 4.5%, would be $5.2 million. $5.2 million on one hand, $3 million on the other. Is it a good deal? No, it's not a good deal. In my opinion, I'm trying to represent my constituents as best I can. This is a total, a total shaft job, really, on anybody that's got a regional park. Anyone's got a regional park. If you've got fairgrounds, if you've got a Fallon Park, Wilmore Park, or Tower Grove, and you vote against this bill, you're voting against yourself. You're voting against your constituents. So I think we ought to send this bill back to committee. Let the budget director weigh in on it. Take another look at this thing, what it really means, what real impact it's going to have on your park and on the city as a whole. Because this would be a tragic mistake if we pass this today. Thank you.
Alderman from the 8th.
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the board. I would support this bill, and I represent Tower Grove Park along with some of my colleagues. I want to put it in perspective, a couple of things, and not on all of the financial terms per se, but each of our parks receive the allocated percentage in from the original ordinance every year. Those dollar amounts that get doled out, especially if you have smaller parks, are insignificant for you to improve the parks within your communities and in your wards. That Tower Grove Park, which was mentioned, it's $450,000 a year. Well, I can tell you, you can barely build any infrastructure, let alone redo the sewers in Tower Grove Park or redo the roads at $450,000 a year. We could pave a couple of roads, we could rebuild some roads. The idea behind this bond issue is allow the parks access to a significant capital sum today to make infrastructure improvements to their parks, structural improvements to their parks, so that the residents can benefit today. All of our parks have had deferred maintenance for many, many years. You know, I would say with the exception of Forest Park, the various groups have done a nice job. And yes, the funds that were allocated specifically for the parks and for capital improvements in the parks, the way it comes every year for the next 30 years, is not going to allow you to do the improvements that you need in your parks to make your parks an asset that draws people to your community, an asset that the people and the residents in your neighborhood can enjoy today. All of your parks, I know, lack many of the infrastructure things that you need to actually use that as part of a draw. People live here in the city, and you can even see what's going on in St. Louis County, all of the hullabaloo over closing parks, shutting down parks because they cost a lot to maintain. The parks go to the essence of our being, whether our kids, the joggers, the residents, the older people in your wards, whether you got senior senators in there. If we can't make these infrastructure changes, our parks will continue to be open fields. And that's what I see in many of the parks in the city. We go out there and we cut the grass occasionally. I don't know what the cutting schedule is, but I know it's no more than every 3 weeks. Our parks are not attractive. You have an opportunity to create funds to do the infrastructures that your parks need or replace the infrastructure in many of our parks that are dying. This is a deal that allows us to capitalize on the fact that these funds are dedicated to the parks for into perpetuity. Bring it and do the infrastructure that you need to make your park an attractive place, to increase the values of the homes in your neighborhood, a place where people can actually enjoy those parks. Now, I'll point out a couple of things, and fortunately, I'm getting on in years, and you guys won't have to deal with me a whole many, many more years from now. If you understand politicians, you see them today, you see them tomorrow. They're always the same. Those funds are dedicated to the park, okay? They're not dedicated to general revenue. A bond issue on that revenue stream does not jeopardize the city's credit rating, unless you're a politician, whether it's next year or 2 years, or you're the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee and you're thinking, well, we need more money. So let's go sneak over here and take this money that was dedicated to the parks, and we'll charge all the parks an administrative fee of maybe 25%. And we've seen that down here with our capital improvements money, our ward-wide capital improvements money. The thing is, what are the politicians, I'm not saying you, what are they going to do tomorrow if our economic conditions get worse? Where's the first place those future politicians, and you young people will be here at that point in time, where are they going to get that money? Oh, this is an easy place. We're going to charge all of the park funds money. That's not what the voters said. Why are people afraid to allow us to spend the money that we want to spend on the infrastructure in our parks to make them attractive? Why are people opposing that? Because that's the little slush fund that we'll figure out, not we, future people will figure out how to raid to go to other areas of the city. When the city, by ordinance, the voters, and it was Freeman Bosley Jr., the mayor, I mean, it was a phenomenal thing for our wards that we put that on the ballot to dedicate that for the parks at that point in time in the capital improvements. Absolutely phenomenal thing, and has gone a long way in each of your wards. And you think about, I know I got Freeman Sr. here, what it was like before we had this. It was not good when it came to streets and sidewalks and lighting in our wards. You know, we didn't have the opportunity to dedicate what our residents want. You have the ability to improve your parks today. Today is the day that we move forward. Today is the day you make your parks an asset again, like they were 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. You have the opportunity to create parks, little oases within the city of St. Louis by doing this. Yes, there is a time value of money, of using money today over using it 30 years from now. But the time value has no bearing in relationship to what good parks, good infrastructures do for your neighborhoods, do for your community, do for the future generations of St. Louisans. You know, young people that come, and I'm fortunate in my neighborhood that Tower Grove Park, we have friends, not quite like Forest Park Forever, that we raise money privately to keep it painted and to help redo the things that are falling apart. It's all private money that we continue to contribute that way. Because we understand that that is great for our kids, that's great for the type of residents that will move to the city of St. Louis. It increases property value, it gives opportunities. And this is an opportunity to improve our parks today, and the offset is we're holding a slush fund for future generations of politicians to sneak in there and grab it and spend it on something else if our budget goes awry in the future. I know the budget items and budget times are tight right now, but you gotta understand the voters dedicated to that purpose and not for the elected officials to go in there and sneak it and move it somewhere else. This is an opportunity to make a long-term investment in your communities, and that's why I like this. I know that the Forest Park situation is a little bit, is more different than all of our other situations here. But if your people like parks, if parks are important to you, if you've got infrastructure needs in your parks, that annual amount you get is never going to allow you to make the type of infrastructure improvements you need to make your park benefit your community. And that's why I support this bill.
All right, Alderman from 11.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I respectfully would request a roll call on the perfecting motion, please.
All right, so noted.
Mr. President, I rise as a public servant, not a politician. My father was the politician in the family, and I don't think that's all bad. Having said that, I don't know why we're having a somewhat of a rush for judgment. I've been in this business a while, and it appears to me that if we had all our ducks in order, and this is in no way intended to malign the sponsor or any of the co-sponsors or anybody else, but I don't think you go to the attempt to sell more revenue bonds for a city, obligate our bond indebtedness any further without having the city's budget director on board with some real numbers, and certainly without having the comptroller on board, who obviously did not express her opposition, in my opinion, in a timely fashion, but she eventually got around to it and came here this morning and told us as a collected assembly that she didn't think this was a step in the right direction. If you look at the verbiage in the bill that's before us, I guess my question would be, if Comptroller Green doesn't want to participate, what are her obligations beyond us sending this to her and the mayor signing it? Does she in fact hire bond counsel? Does she in fact authorize the selling of the bonds? I don't know that. I'm sure it's probably happened before, but certainly that is an interesting dilemma. I just pose for you, whether we like it or not. I just read an article in Vanity Fair, which all of us know is probably one of the best fiscally prudent magazines that's published. And they were talking about the California pension systems. Mr. President, they were talking about cities in California filing bankruptcies. Cities can go broke. If you look at the overall cost and what we owe now in bond indebtedness, and let's call this what it is, we are a TIF-mad city, we're a TIF-mad state, we're a TIF-crazed society. If you throw in what we owe on TIFs And let's just say that the aldermen, the 27th in this committee, are going through the correction center recently. That seems to be the vogue thing to do because there's more bad guys on the outside than there is that are incarcerated. I don't know what that bond issue was. That's not that old a bond issue, but that was $100 million in bonds. I know the Convention Center Hotel has outstanding bonds. I mean, look around. We don't know whether we like it or not, and I don't, but these bond rating agencies can impact how your city is viewed, whether we like it or not. Mr. Speaker, there's where my head is. Mr. President, I'm sorry. Mr. President, I have had occasion to go to Wall Street and sit before a bond council, and quite honestly, Comptroller Jones and Mayor Shamel and myself would sit there and we wear our best tie. In those two other guys' cases, he only had a couple. And you're really judged by MBAs from Wharton and Harvard that are about 23 years old. And quite honestly, they know going in what your bond rating is going to be, but you have to go up there and perform the song and dance in front of them. I guess where I'm going with all this, Mr. President, is I don't know what the issuance of further bonds is going to do to our bond rating. I don't know that we want to pile on. There isn't any question that Forest Park Forever is a godsend. I think we need to go back and revisit this and get some real numbers, and I then could support, and I'm only, I've been reduced to a tinkling cymbal. I one vote. But I think it's extremely important that I know what the further issuance of another millions of dollars in bond issues is going to do to our city's tax, to our bond rating, and what it's going to do to our overall credit rating. So with that, Mr. President, thank you.
Thank you. Although we all know that you represent more than one vote down here. Alderman from the 3rd.
Mr. President and members of the board, I just have a question for all of you. If you own your house and you've been working on this house and you've been taking care of it, even when times were hard, would you give the land or sell the land underneath your house because somebody is going to cut your grass? Sooner or later, if you give up that land where your house is, you're going to lose it. Now, they made several statements about Freeman Bosley Jr., who happens to be my son, still my mayor. But when he was here, we had a conversation before the half-cent and 3/8-cent sales taxes were passed. And part of that conversation was about Forest Park. The city has been in financial difficulty for a long, long time, and there are some reasons for that, and I'm not going to get into why we're in that condition. But the fact is that Forest Park is a jewel. There is not another park within 200 miles of here. The only place else that you can find a zoo is up there in Chicago that's close to here. If Forest Park is such a jewel, why shouldn't people be willing to support that thing without wanting some ownership of it? If we give up the ownership of Forest Park, which is a jewel of the region, that's going to hurt the city's credit rating. That's going to hurt our ability to be able to do the necessary things that we do in this city of St. Louis here. We just need people that are willing to do what happens down there at the Arch. People from all over the world come and visit that Arch. People from all over the region and world should come to visit Forest Park because we have some attractions out there that are not available anywhere else. Why should we give it up? This board bill eventually is going to take that park away from the ownership of the city of St. Louis. The people that are running there, when my son was there, he said, what should we do? I said, I think because we don't have any money and the needs out there are so great. anybody who's willing to provide what is necessary in order to make this park as great as it was when the World Fair came back in the late 1800s, we need to listen to them, but we never need to give up that park. With this board bill, it's uncertain as to whether the city of St. Louis is going to have the land that it has had for over 100 years in its control. You just can't go giving up what it is that you have. Let any and everybody who wants to come in visit that park. If people look and they see the need over there, because the city has great needs, and they should help, because it is something that everybody else can use. And there's no reason in the world why when it rains, it should not rain on the just as well as the unjust. That park is like the rain. Everybody should be able to enjoy it, and it should fall on everybody's lawn and make everybody's grass grow. Why should we give up that park, and why should we not help people like Forest Park Forever to come in here and make that jewel shine even greater than it's shining now? But we should not give it up, period, for any reason whatsoever. I support any and everybody that wants to come in and make that park better than what it is, because it's our children who will get a chance to see a tiger for the first time. The only time I ever saw a tiger was in that park. A lion was in that park. If that park was not there, many of the animals that we see on TV would never see it. And everybody within the region has an obligation to make sure that their children, their grandchildren, and whoever else would like to have an opportunity to come in there. That park should be taken care of, made even greater than it is by those people who understand the importance and the need of this thing. We don't need to be giving it away, period. I'm diametrically opposed to it. My name is on the bill. You can take it off. I think all of those persons that are involved with trying to make the park better should do so, should stay there. And anybody else has an idea should join them. But that park must belong in the inventory of the city. Now, Tower Grove Park sitting over there, the city doesn't own it, but is obligated to give equivalent of $25,000 in gold when we got that park from Mr. Shaw. That was his backyard. And anytime we don't take care of that park, Mr. Shaw, in the ordinance that allowed the city to take control of it, he can come back and take that park. He didn't sell the park. Like we shouldn't give away Forest Park. We shouldn't sell it for any reason whatsoever. That park should never leave the inventory of the city of St. Louis. But because of what it is, any and everybody who has something to offer should be willing to do so at no cost, at no ownership, because what you do benefits everybody in the whole region and our children's children that will come after us. So we can't afford to give that park away. You can take my name off that bill until you put in there specifically that this money we're going to raise is going to be for the perpetuation of making Forest Park what it was born to be, what it should be, what it is now, so that from now on, eons, hundreds of years from now, that children will be able to use that thing, because once they get control over it, then they're going to start charging you to come into the zoo. They're going to start to charge you for the opera now. When I was a kid, I used to go out there and sit in the free seats and enjoy that opera. That will all change. And they're going to come after it piece by piece, step by step. That should be for any and everybody in this whole region, even Illinois, that would like to come over and enjoy that park. That's one of the finest parks in the entire city of St. Louis, and I've been to a lot of them. And there's nothing short about Forest Park, and those persons who are now trying to take control over it, they should come in there, they should work with it, they should make it better, but it should always belong to the city of St. Louis, and there's absolutely a fault of us to give that park away.
Alderman from the 24th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can I ask the Alderwoman from the 28th to yield to a question, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
I think he has to make the request.
Sorry, Alderman from the 24th, please state your question again.
May I ask the, will the Alderwoman from the 28th Ward yield to your question?
Alderman from 28th, will you yield for question to the Alderman from 24th?
I will.
Alderman from 24th, please proceed.
Thank you. In your estimation, what's the value of an acre of land along Kings Highway?
In the millions of dollars. I'm not a real estate expert or assessor, but it's very high-priced property.
In the millions of dollars for a single acre along Kings Highway.
That would be true.
Okay, thank you. I know that the Forest Park Hospital site is for sale right now. That's 13.5 acres. It's on Oakland, immediately adjacent to the park, and the list price is $16.9 million, which is about $1.2 million per acre. This is a $30 million bond issue for Forest Park. There's 1,300 acres in Forest Park. You do the math, that's about $23,000 an acre. The value of Forest Park is vastly greater than $30 million. So even in a catastrophic scenario where we immediately default on this bond, we're not going to lose ownership of the park. There is no possible way we're going to lose ownership of the park over a $30 million bond issue. $30 million, that's less than 10% of the city's budget for a single year. We're not going to lose ownership of the park. So a lot of people are concerned about that, but I don't think that's a realistic scenario. If we had to appraise the value of Forest Park in total, it's probably close to $1 billion. Not to mention the fact that there's income-generating entities in the park, like the zoo and the art museum, and the golf courses, the other things that are there. So a catastrophic scenario where we're defaulting on bond issues, we could still pay off the bond with the revenue generated by the entities in the park until we cleared the bond. So I'm not worried about losing ownership of the park. Now, a rosier picture is 10 years down the road, we issue this bond, Forest Park Forever raises an initial $100 million to endow the park, at which point we'll have enough money to care for the park essentially in perpetuity as long as they maintain the endowment. We free up, a decade later, a lot of money to deal with all the other parks. Forest Park Forever in a decade is going to be pretty much, and the Parks Department are going to be pretty much have completed the master plan by 2020, let's say. They're going to be looking, I think an organization as strong as that is not going to rest on its laurels. It's going to be looking for something else it can contribute. And when the master plan of Forest Park is completed, if I can look out into the future, I bet that organization starts to look at other parks and see what they can contribute in some of our other parks, what amenities they can enhance in our other parks. But to get to that point, we got to finish what we started in 1996 with the master plan. Now look at to date, Forest Park Forever has raised over $125 million to spend in the park. I believe they can raise another 100 for the endowment. And if you look at this chart, when did the fundraising take off? 1996, when we passed the master plan. When you give people a plan, something to work forward to, they will contribute money to it. And if we say, we're now at a point where we're going to work towards completing that master plan, I think they'll be able to raise the money to finish it and then take a broader view of all the city's parks. Maybe they'll have to change their name, but look at what they can do for the rest of the parks. $34 million. Look, if if a $64 million bond issue is going to bankrupt the city, we're already done for. We have massively larger liabilities in the police and fire departments that are you know, an intensely greater burden on the budget of the city than our parks are. And what do our parks give us? Look at the space where we've invested the most money is Forest Park. And look at that, look at how that area is doing around the park. That area is booming compared to any other area in the city. And don't we want to see that same kind of investment around other parks? There's a lot of other parks that I think could attract people too. And the small parks, we all know the small parks have had the least amount of money invested in them. Sleigh Park in my ward had no money invested in it for 10 years while we waited for the dog park scenario to play out. In the last 2 years, we've spent just a little bit of money on lighting, on a walking or jogging path around the park, on a new playground. And every time I go past that park, there are families in the park now. If we want families to live in St. Louis, you know, most of us don't have huge yards. We need parkland, and we need parkland that is appealing to people. And spending the money now will allow us to upgrade those parks, and it can be appealing now, in a decade, in 2 decades, instead of waiting and doing it, you know, 100 feet of pathway at a time. That's not impressive, and people will see the impact. Families will see the impact of this money and appreciate it, I believe, rather than spreading it out over 30 years. And in those 30 years, half the money may be diverted to pay for, you know, whatever it is, whatever the need is that year. So I'd rather lock it in, spend the money on the parks, and enjoy the benefits instead of risking it on the continued, I don't know, Alderman from the 8th called it a slush fund. I don't want to call it a slush fund, but risk other departments taking the money. So I would urge, I think this is a good bill. I'd urge everybody to support it, and I think all of our constituents will applaud us when they see the work that's being done. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Alderman from 28th.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. Let me begin by just saying thank you all for your attention to this, all the aldermen and alderwomen who are here today, who have been listening to this discussion, and who we've had a lot of discussions with over the last few weeks about this bill. I know this is a long meeting, but I think this is a really important subject. I'd like to address just for a minute, if I could, this, what I consider to be a red herring issue about ownership. The city right now, in the bond issue that we issued back in 1997, I think it was, we already have debt on Forest Park. And if we default on that debt, which we're making payments on every year of about $1.4 million, if we default on that debt, do you know who owns Forest Park? The insurance company. The insurance company who insured and underwrote those bonds will be owning Forest Park if we default on that $1.4 million worth of debt. Now let me just ask you, what do you think an insurance company is going to do when they own Forest Park if that were to happen? I don't think that's going to happen. What would they, I mean, they'd have a number of options. I mean, I guess they could put up gates, or they could fence in the park, or they could charge people money to come in, or they could sell it, or I don't know what all of their options would be if we defaulted on those bonds and they were owned by the insurance company. Now, I don't think we're going to default on those bonds, and I don't think we're going to default on this $30 million bond issue either. We're not going to default on it because the voters have voted for a dedicated stream of revenue in Forest Park in previous years that is supposed to be used for capital improvements. And I've got to tell you, I think it is irresponsible for the Board of E&A and for all of us legislators to continue to raid the money that voters voted on to spend on capital improvements in parks. I mean, I know we have a difficult budget situation, but we ought to listen to what the voters voted on originally. So I don't think we're going to default on these bonds. In the long shot chance that we would, I would certainly rather have Forest Park Forever own in this park than some insurance company probably up in Hartford or maybe London, or I don't know where they are. But I am sure that we'd get a lot better treatment from Forest Park Forever than we would from the insurance company. If we default on the bonds for the rec centers, we have a new rec center south. We're about to open a new rec center north. Those bonds have insurance on them. What if we default on those bonds? Who's going to own those rec centers? It's going to be some insurance company. I mean, I think that this ownership issue is certainly a wedge issue. Sounds good. Oh my, we don't want Forest Park Forever to own this park. And you know what? We don't want Forest Park Forever to own this park. But I think that anytime you borrow money, if we default on any borrowed money that we have for new fire trucks, guess what? The fire trucks are going back to whoever makes the loan on it. Okay, wasn't quite finished here. Just a couple more things, and I do appreciate your patience. I know we've been talking about this for a long time. I don't think this ownership issue is a real issue. I think it is a way to try to kill this bill because it is not any different than the bonds that we have on the rec center or the bonds that we already have on Forest Park, except that in this case, it wouldn't go back to the insurance company. It would go to Forest Park Forever. So that's number one. Secondly, I don't think it's right. I don't think it's right to take the money that the voters have voted on to be used in parks for capital improvements in parks. I don't think it's right to take that money and use it for something else. Even when we do need money for other things, I just don't think it's right to basically siphon that money off that voters voted for and use it for something else. And finally, although I'm regretting it a little bit today, it was originally one of my ideas to bring other parks into this mix here, because there are 106, I think it is, parks in the city of St. Louis. 6 of them are big, and my friend, the colleague from the 13th Ward, may be getting all the money that he needs for the park that's in the 13th Ward, but I don't think all of you are. I don't think all of you would stand up and saying, oh yeah, I'm getting enough money to take care of the parks that are in whichever ward you represent. So I really think that parks and what kind of condition parks are in really affect the value of the houses in your neighborhood. It affects the quality of life of your constituents just as much as Forest Park is good for the 28th Ward, the 24th Ward, the 17th Ward, and the surrounding wards. So I think that we ought to be spending money in the other parks as well. They need it. I mean, there's $100 and some million worth of projects that if we had the money, we'd do in those parks. But all we could figure out how to bond was the stream of revenue that we have now. No new taxes, no new revenue, just the stream of revenue that we have now that people have voted on will support $34 million worth of bonds. That money, if we improve those parks around your house, in the short term, your constituents will have a better quality of life. In all likelihood, their property values will go up. I mean, there's never been a good park in a neighborhood that didn't help property values. So I think overall, we just raise up the city by raising up the quality of our parks. We do have other needs, and I understand that the comptroller and many of you want to be sure that we have flexibility in our budget. But I'm going to tell you, we may have flexibility in our budget, but our parks are not in good shape. And we ought to just, you know, not go down the middle of the road here. A constituent said to me recently, when I actually made a change with the help of the street department to an intersection, and the change was in order to make it better for walkers and bikers and runners to be able to get to Forest Park without getting run over by a car. Now, what that change means, though, is that the cars will not be able to careen quite as quickly through the intersection. And so I'm getting it, you know, from the people who drive cars who are going to have to spend an extra 3 seconds to go through the intersection. And on the other side, I'm getting from the runners, the bikers, and pedestrians, oh, they're so happy with this change. So it's tough getting those emails that say, I'm never going to vote for you again because of this. But then I got to thinking, where would you rather be? Would you rather be in the middle of the road, getting hit from both sides? Or would you rather be either on one side or the other of the issue? And at least you're getting hit from one side, but the folks on the other side agree with you. So I would say to you that it's time that we do invest in our parks here. And with that, I will guess yield to any questions. Did the sponsor have something that? Okay, all right.
What are you doing? You're yielding to the?
I guess with that, at the request of the sponsor, I would request that we put this bill on the informal calendar.
Madam Clerk, please make note of that.
So noted.
Okay. Board Bill 190 will remain on the perfection and formal calendar. We'll dispense with line items 9 and 10, first reading of board bills.
Board Bill 217, sponsored by Alderwoman Young, an ordinance affirming adoption of a redevelopment plan, redevelopment area, redevelopment project, authorizing the execution of a redevelopment agreement between the city and C9 TIF containing a severability clause. Board Bill 218, sponsored by Alderwoman Young, an ordinance recommended by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, amending ordinance 67480 and 68324 relating to the issuance and delivery of not to exceed $4,600,000 plus issuance costs, principal amount of tax increment revenue notes for Building 9 component, ballpark lofts. Board Bill 219, sponsored by Alderman Boyd, an ordinance dissolving the special allocation fund for the I-70 and Goodfellow area, 4800 through 50 Goodfellow redevelopment area. Board Bill 220, sponsored by Alderman Rhodey, an ordinance recommended by the Board of Public Service to vacate Travel and Children's Place from Kings Highway eastwardly to a point in the city. Board Bill 221, sponsored by Alderwoman Flowers, an ordinance to amend ordinance 68957, authorizing and directing the issuance and delivery of not to exceed $3,500,000 plus issuance cost, principal amount of tax increment revenue notes for North Broadway Cary redevelopment project, containing a severability clause and an emergency clause. Board Bill 222, sponsored by Alderwoman Flowers, an ordinance recommended by the Port Authority Commission, authorizing and directing the mayor and the comptroller to enter into a lease amendment by and between the city and ACL Transportation. That's the extent of our first readings.
Reference to committee.
To the Housing Committee, Board Bill 217, 218, 219, and 221. To the Streets Committee, Board Bill 220, and to the Transportation and Commerce Committee, Board Bill 222. That's the extent of reference to committees.
Dispense with line item 13 and 14, perfection consent.
Board Bill 169, sponsored by Alderman Wessels, an ordinance recommended by the City Planning Commission pertaining to the procedures for the initiation of change and the requirements of a notice of proposed change in zoning code, repealing portions of section 24 of ordinance 59979 and enacting in lieu thereof new sections pertaining to the same subject matter and containing a severability and an emergency clause. Board Bill 141, sponsored by Alderman Kennedy, and an ordinance recommended and approved by the Airport Commission and the Comptroller and the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, making certain findings with respect to the transfer of up to $13,727,769 of excess money that the city intends to transfer from the Debt Service Stabilization Fund to the Airport Revenue Fund, containing a severability clause and an emergency clause. Board Bill 183, sponsored by Alderman Kennedy, an ordinance recommended and approved by the Airport Commission and the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, ratifying and adopting the actions of the Mayor and the Comptroller in accepting and executing certain grant agreement for a maximum federal obligation of $7,318,112 for the reimbursement of direct costs associated with reconstruction of Taxiway Delta Phase 2 and Taxiway Echo Phase 2, containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 184, sponsored by Alderman Kennedy, and an ordinance recommended and approved by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, authorizing and directing the Director of Airports and the Comptroller to enter into and execute the fuel system lease and use agreement with the 20-year term between the city and STL Fuel Company, LLC, containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 185, sponsored by Alderman Kennedy, and an ordinance recommended and approved by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, authorizing and directing the Director of Airports and the Comptroller to enter into and execute the Lambert St. Louis Airport luggage and cart rental concession agreement between the city and Flight Services Systems Incorporated, doing business as Easy Cart, containing a severability clause and an emergency clause. Board Bill 174, sponsored by Alderwoman Young, an ordinance authorizing and directing the mayor and the comptroller to enter into a second memorandum of agreement between the city and Bi-State Development Agency of the Missouri, Illinois Metropolitan District, authorizing the issuance of City Department of Streets permits, which provide the agency mooring privileges, containing a severability clause that's the extent of perfection consent.
Alderman from 13, you recognize on the motion for the perfection consent count.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the board, I move for perfection of the aforementioned bills on the consent calendar.
Moved by Alderman from 13, seconded by Alderman from 27th. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, motion carries. We will dispense with line item 16 through 19. First reading of resolutions.
Resolution 249, sponsored by Alderman Williamson, and the Board of Aldermen support LCRA entering into a 99-year master lease for the St. Louis West End Transformational Initiative.
Alderman from the 26th, you recognize on the first reading of resolution number 249.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the board, I'll ask you to suspend the rules for adoption.
No, you want to...
Unanimous consent of resolution 249.
Hearing no objection, please proceed, Alderman.
Yes, this resolution, I move to perfect the motion.
Move for adoption of resolution 249. Alderman from the 23rd, second. Alderman, now please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. What this resolution basically does, this is a redevelopment initiative that will take place in the West End neighborhood, and it will provide affordable housing, which we desperately need in the city of St. Louis. So with that, I renew my motion.
It's been moved and seconded that we adopt resolution number 249. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
That's the extent of first reading of resolutions.
Second reading.
We have none.
Miscellaneous unfinished business.
We have none.
Announcements.
Friday full board meeting, that's November the 18th, Friday full board meeting, 10 a.m. in the chambers. That's the extent of my announcements.
Any further announcements? Any further announcements? Alderman from 27.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I make my announcement, I wanted to recognize three special guests, Jim Sahada, Reverend David Girth, and Reverend Starsky Wilson with MCU.
You're welcome.
Several things. Tomorrow, 27th Ward and Northwest Academy on Riverview, we will be passing out clothing, food, and furniture between the hours of 10 and 4 o'clock, as well as those individuals we've already started. We'll be passing out 500 baskets to those residents in the 27th Ward and for this Thanksgiving. But the Builder Bag, which is the week before Christmas, you still have time to get your name and number. Call the Riverview Development Corporation. Their number is 382-9000. Call that in, residents in the 27th and 2nd Ward, to get your basket the week before Christmas. Last year we gave out 3,300. This year we're hoping to reach 4,000. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, thank you. Alderman from the 4th.
Members of the board, I'd like to give a special thanks to all the veterans that serve in the United States service and the ones that are serving now. A special congratulations, and I'm sure they'll have some activity in the park. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Alderman. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Alderman from 27.
Thank you, Mr. President. Kind of confused on the days we're here. This is a Thursday. This happened Saturday.
Hey.
Saturday. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Alderman from the 19th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to give a special thank you to the John Cochran VA Hospital and staff for all the activities that they spearhead in the region for our veterans. There was a breakfast and recognition program this morning. Tomorrow they will also have the annual program that we've started and they're going to also, for the holidays, they're going to put together a couple of concerts that will be free to the veterans, and we're also looking at some other initiatives. I just have to say a special thank you to them because I'm blessed in my ward that I have 5 offices that provide services to veterans and looking for more. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Any further announcements? Any further announcements? Alderman from 13, you recognize on the motion to excuse.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to excuse the alderman from the 2nd and 15th wards due to necessary absence.
Moved by the alderman from 13th, seconded by the alderman from 27th. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Alderman from 13, you recognize on the motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to adjourn the meeting until Friday, 10 a.m., November 18th.
Moved by the alderman from 13th, seconded by the alderman from the 25th. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We stand adjourned.